Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg now tells ABC News that as they learn more about a motive in the shooting of a healthcare CEO, there may be additional charges against the suspect. The NYPD says they have matched the gun allegedly used by Luigi Mangione to 3 shell casings found at the scene of the crime. There have been growing concerns about whether that gun was 3D printed. Those guns are, as the New York Times puts it, an exceedingly rare variety. And one former ATF official even points out it is especially rare to recover a 3D printed gun used in a crime. Quote, if true, this would be the highest profile crime ever committed with a 3D printed gun and one of only a handful documented. Joining us now, former U.S. Attorney, professor at the University of Alabama Law School and MSNBC legal analyst Joyce Vance, and former Associate Deputy Director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms and Explosives, who was quoted in the New York Times article, Tom Chittum. Good to see both of you. Joyce, I want to start with DA Bragg saying there may be additional charges. There's already murder, so what else might be possible?
Right. There may well be charges related to the gun itself. You know, ghost guns are a hot ticket. ATF has a case currently in front of the Supreme Court involving the regulation of ghost guns. There could be something that lies in with that, as well as with transportation across state lines. But as you point out, Chris, none of those charges will be more significant than the murder charge. They may permit prosecutors to tell the story more completely or even offer some fodder for a plea deal.
So, Tom, let's talk about this alleged murder weapon. The NYPD chief of detectives, Joseph Kenney, said it could have been 3D printed. First of all, is it easy to figure out whether it was? How does someone even do that? Or is it more likely that they could buy a 3D printed gun if they didn't make us? Give us your expertise.
So, many people, when they hear the term ghost gun or what the government calls privately made firearms, they may assume 3D printed. The reality is, though, this phenomenon that has emerged in the last few years of privately made firearms mostly involves commercially made kits that require just a little bit of machining. It's actually very rare to see a 3D printed firearm. To your question about how they will determine that, physical examination will reveal that. And as I understand it, only the frame of this firearm was 3D printed, and it was assembled probably with commercially made aftermarket accessories like the slide and the barrel.
So when the NYPD chief of detectives says it could have been 3D printed, do they already know more than they're saying, I guess?
Well, so if I can show you,
Sure.
What I'm holding up here is a complete commercially made Glock pistol. This is, of course, a firearm under federal law. This is a Glock frame. This also is a firearm in and of itself under the law, and it's the only component that's regulated. The other pieces of the firearm, like the frame, like the slide and like the barrel, they are not regulated. And so a person could 3D print the frame and then use other pieces that they purchased commercially to assemble it. It looks like that might be what has happened here.
So would that make it incredibly difficult to trace or no?
Well, that's interesting. So we know that the authorities have matched the ballistic evidence left at the crime scene, the cartridge cases, to a test fire of the recovered firearm. So the 3D printed component does not diminish their ability to make a forensic match. The one thing that it may thwart, though, is their ability to identify the source of that firearm. And if you look at federal gun law, the Gun Control Act, it has 2 broad goals: to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them, and to give law enforcement leads on tracing the origin of the firearms when they're inevitably recovered in crimes. But in this case, I haven't seen anything that suggests the suspect is prohibited from possessing firearms, so he could have gone into a gun store and purchased one. If his reason for having a 3D printed firearm was to eliminate any connection or any paper trail, then one has to wonder why he still possessed this very incriminating piece of evidence 5 days after he used it to commit murder.
Yeah, that is another fascinating question here. Joyce, when you talk about using perhaps other charges to build a case, to help a prosecutor tell a story, Maryland, New York, and New Jersey all ban ghost guns. Pennsylvania does not, though, and I wonder if that could play into potential charges here.
Sure, that's absolutely a possibility. Prosecutors are always thinking in terms of backup charges or charges that might let them leverage a plea deal. But here, you know, this standout charge will be premeditated murder, which will carry the strongest penalty. The point that Tom is making about how the gun is manufactured and how that impacts law enforcement's ability to trace it is really important here as well, because when the Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar argued that ghost gun case in front of the United States Supreme Court earlier this year, she made the point that people only get ghost guns for one of two reasons. Either they're prohibited persons, which Mangione does not appear to be. That might be, for instance, a convicted felon who can't legally possess a firearm. Or they get these guns because they intend to use them to commit a crime. They don't want the gun to be traced back to the source. Holding on to a gun like this might suggest that there are future plans that an individual has. I don't think we've seen any evidence of that here, but that has to be a consideration for law enforcement.